Is the cloud we know already out of date? Serverless, edge, AI, how are these things changing the face of cloud? I'm Chris.
I'm Elliot.
And this is Experts in Polo Shirts. All right, let's do it.
Exciting, invigorating. Whoa. Love podcasts. Yeah. Podcast friends.
Right, so titles, is the cloud as you know it already out of date? I think the answer could be maybe.
For public cloud at the moment, I think really what we're seeing is that organizations have moved to the cloud very quickly, moved everything they can into there without actually improving on any of the services that they deliver. So we've ended up with large organizations with masses of infrastructure in the cloud. And when we talk about is the cloud already out of date, in most cases, that infrastructure could be the thing that's out of date.
From what I've seen, sort of organizations are facing a big hardware refresh. They're reluctant to kind of make a big capital expenditure and kind of looking at more OpEx type models.
Yep.
So yes, they've decided, right, we're going to move into public cloud. What have we got? Normally it's a bunch of VMs. Okay, migrate them in as they are pretty much. So I don't like the term, but it's one a lot of people use, and that's lift and shift.
Yep. The
business can kind of operate as normal and everyone's happy, and a lot of the time it just ends there. And what have you actually gained? You're in the cloud, but you're kind of just running the same infrastructure that you were previously.
Yeah.
So I guess when we say is cloud as you know it out of date, what could you do to those virtual machines to modernize and improve things?
Yeah, so the people that have got it easiest at the moment are those that are born in the cloud. I hate using the term. But those are individuals that have come in, built an application on a PaaS service and haven't need to have the reliance on a virtual machine. So to transition from a more traditional infrastructure where you've got maybe IIS servers and you've got some legacy SQL or visual file applications or something like that, you need to really think about what applications are being delivered, what's the lifetime of those, does the vendor support PaaS solutions, is there a SaaS solution? For new builds, for new applications and new needs, we should always be shying away from virtual machines. They should be the last option. And then we're talking specifically about applications right now, but the exact same applies for SQL. SQL is probably one of the largest costs that we see. But then further than that, when we start using PaaS services, we unlock scalability and availability. So if we're talking about something like SQL, we could use elastic pools, so we can scale resources dynamically based on demand. If you're a retailer, for example, you sell pre-built computers on the internet. You could have a database or a application stack that during Black Friday or during a new release can scale up and then scale straight back down. If you've got virtual machines, yeah, you can do that in Azure, but it's a lot harder. You're probably talking about deprovisioning the virtual machine where you resize disks, stuff like that. And it just makes the whole process a lot easier. And actually, in most cases, a lot cheaper too. You know, if you need to run an application, and at the moment you got it on an IIS box, you're paying for a virtual machine. But that application might be absolutely fine as a function app or some other service. And maybe it's only used a little bit, and then it could be consumption-based. Ends up very cheap.
Yeah, I think that scale point is quite pertinent as well, especially when you look at kind of SQL moving into the future. And I think if you ask a lot of people what is the future of SQL or more generally kind of databases in the cloud, it's a lot of that's going to be driven by AI and what that can do for your data sets and do to kind of provide efficiencies and improvements on your data and how you use it. And I don't think if you're running SQL kind of on Azure VMs, you're really going to be able to leverage or benefit from that in the same way as if you were kind of using those PaaS services to run your databases. So yeah, I mean, we've touched on PaaS and I suppose how that is a good reflection of the cloud as it currently is and also how it's evolving. PaaS, kind of a lot of people throw around the word serverless. What does that mean? And is anything ever really truly serverless?
It's a good question. It's really easy to answer the last bit anyway. So nothing's ever really actually serverless. It just means that there's no server for the individual to manage. What a lot of these PaaS services are, so the likes of logic, function, containerization, is just virtualization. So we are provided a block of compute within our larger virtual machine, and the services that we want to run just run within there. Especially important when you think about consumption. So when we are delivering an application on a consumption base, actually it doesn't exist at all. So it's just storage at that point. And at the point where it runs, container is spun up, the service runs for whatever process it is that it's trying to do, and then disappears again. It isn't to the end user. Is it serverless? Yeah, there's no management. It means that obviously if there's any problem with the underlying infrastructure, it'll just fail over. It'll just go onto a new host.
Yeah, because it's not necessarily a new concept, the kind of things being ephemeral and only existing for kind of short periods of time and spun up and provisioned when you need them and then spun back down when you don't. Certainly not new, but I think it's just something that a lot of people haven't really properly got to grips with.
Yeah, there's very few organizations that actually were using containerization before Azure or before public cloud, so AWS and GCP, but those that were already understand it. The idea of containerization or short-lived applications is that exactly that. You give it some compute and maybe it's only for the time that it needs it, and then afterwards it just turns back to storage again. So yeah, it's been around for ages, but now it's far more attainable. The traditional, in quotes, customer that would have stacks of virtual machines isn't the same developer type that is going to necessarily understand containerization. So having the ability to not have to understand that layer and actually just focus on the application makes it a lot easier.
Yeah, and it's something that, doesn't really translate well to an on-premises sort of infrastructure or something that you manage yourself, because obviously you've got all this hardware that you paid for, sometimes up front, but however it's financed, it's a big load of hardware that you own and you're responsible for.
Yeah.
It's difficult to kind of utilize that in a way where you're spinning things up, winding them down, but getting the most kind of out of it in terms of costs and your money. I suppose what I mean by that is, you look at the cloud, Azure an example. There's just nearly, not quite infinite, but seemingly infinite scale there. Things like spot instances and consumption-based pricing means that you don't have to worry about how much compute you own or have. It's just there, and it's not anything you ever really need to consider. It's like, we need this for this much time on this date, and it's always going to be there and it's available.
Yeah, the traditional way of thinking would be that you would plan your IT budget, you would buy some infrastructure, and if your development team wanted to do a piece of work, they could do it providing that it was within the realms of what you already had. Now we can think about things like cost of product, so cost of sale is a really good one. So if we say we want to launch a new campaign tomorrow, and the development team have got a good idea that they want to stand some new service up, we don't have to go and buy anything. They can just run it up. We can think about what was the cost for each sale that we got. This is just an example. And then at that point, we've stood up a service without even worrying about it. I think the big change has been most organizations didn't have developers. Developers really sat with vendors, SIs, and really large companies. But now we'll have an accountancy firm that will have a development team. We'll have a legal firm that will have a development team. That never used to happen. So if those people existed 15 years ago and it was all on-prem, they would have been doing containerization already at that point. Maybe not 15, but close to that. But now everyone's got it. It needs to be more attainable. And yeah, we found the ways to do that within Microsoft's Azure platform.
So we got serverless. We haven't got any virtual machines to look after anymore. We can kind of click a few buttons or put a YAML file together and have this resource created magically for us. That's great. Do we need infrastructure people anymore? Can a developer just kind of go off and do what they need to do and not have to worry about somebody looking after it?
Good question. So the development and infrastructure teams, even way back when, so let's say 10 years ago, have always suffered or struggled to work together. in the development are always focused on developing a service and getting it out. That's their only goal. So their deadline to get an application on. The infrastructure teams typically are focused on access control and security and the underlying platform. That doesn't go away with serverless. So I think a lot of people think that serverless means that I don't have to manage anything. No, in fact, you potentially have to manage more. So with a serverless object, so we've got PaaS in Azure, we need to think very carefully about the security of that service. If we deploy a function app today, for example, we go into Azure and we click next, and then we deploy our app to it. That is by default available to the internet. So the infrastructure teams need to support developers in the deployment of their services. What tends to work best is infrastructure still manage the PaaS services. So they would manage function, they would put private endpoints and VNet integration and manage all the front end for that. And then the developers would develop the code and deploy it to that function.
Yeah, so and it's a different skill set, I suppose, as well for the people who are looking after that platform. I mean, networking kind of is always going to be there. In the cloud, it's a bit different to your traditional kind of on-premises networking, but it's also the same in terms of some of its concepts.
Yeah.
You know, you always need storage, and again, it's different in the cloud. It's abstracted away, but it's still the key kind of concepts are there. So the way all these different bits and pieces tie in together and need to be considered and managed, especially as you say from a security perspective, is something that's quite important. And I don't think is something that you should really kind of try and burden a development team with, because they're there to create your applications and write code, not necessarily look after what it's actually running on.
Yeah, they're not the right people. So if I had a really good developer that was the best at the game, the best in the game, I should say, I wouldn't expect them to understand network security, and I wouldn't really want them to. I want them to be a really good developer. So over recent times, we've seen the sort of advent of a new term, which is platform ops, and this is almost a team that's between infrastructure and development. So platform ops teams or platform operations is around providing secure platforms that developers can use. So that would be where a developer could request services through pipelines that already exist. So function app we keep on looping back to is a really good example of that, where development would leverage the platform ops teams to deploy the function apps natively with all of the policy, all of the controls that the infrastructure team are requiring. Now, as you go to smaller teams with less people, that becomes harder. So where we have, a smaller organization with 2 or 3 developers and maybe the same for infrastructure, those teams just need to work better together. It's a challenge. There's always going to be constraints and deadlines to hit, but the infrastructure teams need to work closely with dev to make sure that everything's secure, not cross over. So an infrastructure person should be amazing at security, infrastructure, and not cross into dev. And likewise, a developer shouldn't be trying to cross the other way, because there's always going to be some blind spots, and to be better at the bit that you do is far more valuable.
Absolutely. So, I mean, this all sounds great. There must be some downsides, though. I mean, the first thing that kind of springs to my mind is that if you're using something like a function app or a logic app, that doesn't really exist anywhere in the same format anywhere apart from in Azure. So it's not, although you could migrate away from that into something else, it's not portable. It's not as straightforward as just picking it up and putting it somewhere else. What are the other sort of downsides that you can see to PaaS?
Yeah, so if you have a virtual machine in Azure today and you want to move back to Hyper-V, or you want to go to a different cloud provider, it's relatively straightforward. There's quite large egress costs, but it's pretty simple. If you want to move from function, Logic App is actually worse, so we'll talk about Logic App. If you want to move from Logic App to another service, there's a lot more that needs to be considered. A Logic App doesn't exist as the same thing in one of the other providers. Now, a function app's slightly different, because on functions you run things like .NET applications, so it's actually a little bit easier. You still need to reconsider what platform it's going to sit on, but obviously there's development time there, and with development time there's costs. So we've had pushback in the past about, oh, well, if we move from VMs into PaaS, then yeah, we're vendor locked. And that is the case to some degree. But I think the chances of having an issue with the likes of Microsoft's Azure cloud platform or GCP or AWS, whichever one it might be, is far lower than the impact that, the business that you're in just going under. I think the likelihood of there being an issue with your business as opposed to one of those businesses is far greater.
Mm.
So yeah, you are vendor locked, but over time you can develop new services, and there'll always be a new thing. There'll always be a new thing that we end up looking to maybe 5 years from now, and that's just part of the development process. In the same way that not everyone used Exchange at one point, and older people will know this, but at one point people were using Lotus Notes. That doesn't exist anymore. So,
thank goodness.
Yeah, yeah.
Perhaps you can educate me a little bit here. Is a container is a potential solution to that? So, as I kind of understand them, they're a further abstraction away from your server or virtual machine, and depending on the kind of platform you use, are quite portable. You can pick them up and drop them between different environments. But does that solve the problem of being locked into a particular cloud platform, or is it not quite that straightforward?
Yeah, it could do. Yeah. So one of my favorite solutions that we've got at the moment is container instances or even container apps. So at its simplest level, a container is in the same way that hypervisor has a virtual machine, the virtual machine could have a container.
Mm.
So we're just gone down another level. So if we use something like container instances or container apps and then put our image into that container, that is far more portable. Now, we still need a new solution in another provider, but we could run that on-prem. We could run that in any cloud solution. Very easy. It's a bit closer to the function apps way of doing things.
So we've spoken a bit about serverless and the many kind of benefits and on one or two downsides to it. There are a lot of people out there, as we've both seen throughout our careers, who do actually quite like virtual machines and like looking after them and having that comfort around them. And to take it a bit more seriously, there are also many kind of regulatory and compliance and governance type reasons where you may want to run a virtual machine outside of the cloud, so on premises or at the edge, as some people might kind of term it now. Edge computing, and for those of you who haven't watched it already, there's a good, well, I say good, it's my video, but there's a video that we have on Azure Local that kind of goes into it in a little bit more detail. And if you want to check that out, by all means, please do. So when it comes to edge computing, what's your take on it? How is it helping us to move forward and into the future?
So Azure Local, specifically when we talk about the edge, we touched on this earlier around, are people already moving away from the cloud? Are we doing things the right way? Some of the challenges that organizations have had is still a need for compute on-prem. Now, it seems a little bit old-fashioned to some cloud-first organizations, but there are businesses and business types that really need that compute on-prem. So if I give you an example, a manufacturer that wants to do visual analysis of product for things like defects. So I went to a talk recently where someone talked about bedpans being made. And they used to have a line of people that would stand there and visually check these over to see if there was any damage, and they would pick out the ones that were. Now they're leveraging AI compute. They're actually doing it over an express route at the moment, but they're discussing the need for on-prem services. Mm-hmm. So with the use of Azure Local, obviously locally, they are able to run the compute and the LLM that they've developed for it. That detects where there's a defect in a resource and then sends any of the defects up to their archive storage, which is actually in the cloud. So Azure Local has its place, but it's very, very niche. So I wouldn't expect that every organization is going to go out and buy Azure Local.
Yeah, certain industries, isn't it, as you mentioned, it's kind of manufacturing, engineering, retail. So one of Microsoft's kind of big case studies for Azure Stack or Azure Local is big supermarket chain in Australia. They use AI within the stores to do things like identify products that put on scales for customers rather than having them push buttons and figure out what it is. And they do kind of some very clever stuff with monitoring queues and analysis on that and doing things in real time. And I guess the point is that rather than have to send this information up to the cloud, have it processed, put through AI, and then the results sent back to you, it's all done kind of within your locality.
Yeah, it's a lot better. So you've given a good example there of the supermarket. McDonald's are apparently doing the same now in the US. So they do real-time AI analytics of drive-through orders. So for them, getting the information provided to them by the time the person gets to the window just isn't possible by sending it over the cloud. So I think Azure Local makes a lot of sense out of necessity, but it wouldn't be something that you'd necessarily need to strive for as a business unless there's that use case. If you need that super quick turnaround of information, it makes loads of sense. If you don't need it, then don't go anywhere near it. I think the cost associated with it, especially if you're just going to run some virtual machines, doesn't make sense at all. You'd be better off just having a, in quotes, traditional hybrid setup where you could potentially have, I don't know, a print server or a domain controller running on-prem. Yeah,
because from a management perspective as well, there's a lot you can do with Azure Arc without necessarily going all the way into kind of Azure Local. You can have your own hardware that you choose and configure and set up and control yourself if that's what you want to do. But the virtual machines, whether Windows or Linux, you can use Arc Agent and other appliances on premise and let that talk to Azure and you can manage it from that kind of single pane of glass still. And there's a lot of other products it ties in with, such as Defender and all those other bits. So there are certainly options available out there.
I think one of the big selling points of Azure Local is that it's an extension of Azure. But like you said, if you've got Arc anyway, do you really need it? I think the only reason you would want to go down that route is like those aforementioned providers or organizations that have already done it. You want to start looking at things like, I want to use a function on-prem, or I want to use this AI-based service that's available in Azure, but it's a local version of it as well. So you just need to check, are we doing the right thing? Do we actually need this? Is it something that we should even consider? I think to get to the point where you're actually POCing it, you must have a real good idea of the latency requirements that you have, because most people would probably get by with just sending it to into Azure to have the data processed.
So we've touched on AI a little bit there around how people are kind of using it in certain industries. Artificial intelligence in the cloud and in the future of IT, obviously it's something that's very topical at the moment, and I suspect will be kind of into the future for quite some time. What do you see as the kind of main places where it's going to really have an impact?
So in cloud, there's a couple of areas that Microsoft are already pushing what they, in quotes, term as AI. It's more just intelligence based on data. So there's a whole other subject about that. But from an AI point of view, we've seen cost is a really good example of that. So cost analysis within the billing section of a subscription at the moment. That'll now show you things like trends, resources that have dramatically increased in cost, that kind of thing. And I think that those tools will become more powerful as time goes on. So there are quite a few third parties, a couple I know really well, a couple that I don't know. I'm not going to mention any names. I don't want to give them a free plug, but there are some really good cost management services out there, third parties. And I think what Microsoft will probably do is they want everyone to spend as much as possible. But what they also don't want to do is get people to eventually leave the cloud. So they're going to start providing more and more services around cost management, right sizing. Maybe they're going to support with things like deprovisioning out of hours, that kind of stuff. Now, we can do all that manually at the moment anyway, but it's a manual task. We need to go and review things. We need to build in automation. And I think that will become more native as time goes on. I think that cost analysis is the first step really in that.
Yeah, it's a really kind of powerful tool, and you kind of hope that Microsoft continues to build on it, and who knows, maybe it'll get to the point where it's just automatically making cost savings for you without ever really having to kind of look at things. I mean, but perhaps not. Obviously, Microsoft want to make money from their product, but
I'd be skeptical that they would automatically reduce cost. However, they might provide the tools where we can do it. You're still going to need some skill and some understanding of what you're doing. But I think some of these services that they're starting to put in and leverage, they're going to be more attainable for those that maybe don't have as deep of understanding.
So I suppose then you're more really leveraging the intelligence part of it to offer you insight and to kind of look into data and extract key bits of information that you can then act upon, as opposed to an automation thing where, okay, it then has this, but rather than give it to you and decide what to do, it kind of makes the decisions itself. I mean, when you look at some of the PaaS resources in Azure, you have the options in terms of scale to let it automatically manage itself and scale, and that's based on certain heuristics sometimes. But the alternative is to manually do it yourself, and it's like, well, do I trust Microsoft automation to kind of scale this in a way that is not only going to provide performance for my applications, but also optimize costs, or is that something that really people are going to want to keep a hold of and do themselves?
I think it's coming. I was looking at some services the other day, and Dev Center for hosted DevOps agents has had a bit of an overhaul, and the availability. So what this is, just to give some context, is this is self-hosted agents that are managed by Microsoft. So your Azure DevOps environment can have access to the effective LAN in Azure. One of the things that stood out to me was the scale options for those virtual machines. There's now an option for automatic, and I've not seen that before in any of the other services. Mm-hmm. So I think what it is under the skin is VMSS, but it's using intelligence to work out when developers are deploying to these agents and building up information about that so that it'll then scale them at the times when it sees that.
I've seen that, and you get a slider, don't you? It's like you can either put it more towards cost or more towards performance, and as you say, it kind of looks at your previous usage and decides on when it will make those agents available to you. And it'll either make your pipelines more responsive or kind of less responsive but less costful. But I think the manual option there at least provides some sort of input in terms of it will let you build a schedule. So it'll say, this is what we think will work well, i.e. Monday to Friday, 9 to 5, we'll make an agent on standby, let's say. So as soon as you want to run a job, it's there and it executes, as opposed to having to spin up from nothing. But then out of those hours, it's kind of winded down and nothing really exists, and therefore there's no cost. In a similar way, I guess, to kind of how people use logic apps and similar things now to kind of spin up resources and deprovision them or deallocate them when they're not needed based on a schedule.
Yeah, like VMSS. So you can have a host pool of services that are available, and you can do it either based on time or based on capacity of some description, like CPU. But I think that is an indication to me that automatic sort of learning of a behavior is potentially what we'll start to see in terms of scalability for the other resources. There'll always be the manual option, but I think having that could be quite useful, especially for those businesses that maybe don't have the understanding or the technical know-how to go in and make those changes to schedules, or even know that schedules exist. So for someone that's maybe a little bit newer to Azure, hasn't maybe dealt with a lot of clients and maybe is internal, setting it to automatic could be the one-stop solution that they then never have to go in and change it again. Because you might set a schedule today, but in 2-3 months' time, that schedule might not be right at all. So it will adapt to change. And I think that as we start to see these sort of optimization tools increase, it'll be of that nature. You'll still have to go and enable it. Like we've briefly said, Microsoft aren't going to take money out of their own pocket, but they're going to provide people with the tools to do things in the right way.
Yeah.
I think that just on the same thing of doing things in the right way, I think one of the other areas that could potentially be seen is that as an MSP, people come to us and they ask us for advice on how to deploy things in a secure, safe, scalable manner. I think that as those AI services integrate with Azure better, they're going to do things like recommend that you don't publicly expose things and provide some level of architectural guidance. I don't know, do you see that happening? Do you think that that's the way that this will go?
I think where it have more of an impact is where you have a kind of a cloud engineer or IT engineer, and some of the tasks that they might do, I think you will see potentially replaced by that sort of intelligence. The bigger picture, the more strategic, architectural type roles and jobs and functions, I suppose, I mean, who knows, in the future AI may potentially be able to replicate and replace that, but I think certainly as a starting point it's going to be more the engineering type functions. So where you look at kind of how robotics had an impact in manufacturing, so on the production line, rather than have people assemble things, that they use robots and machines to kind of automate that process. I think you'll see a similar sort of thing, not just in cloud, but across IT, really. Those straightforward, simple, repeatable tasks that people are maybe doing at the moment. Sometimes they're being a bit smarter about it and leveraging code and other kind of tools that help things. But to kind of just cut that out completely, have a machine do that, and then maybe you've just got a smaller handful of people with a level of oversight just to make sure that it's doing what it's supposed to do and providing the results that the organization wants.
Yeah, I think a lot of people have, and you see it on articles and in videos all the time, that people are scared that AI is going to come in and replace everyone. I don't think that's the case. I think what's going to happen is people are going to do more with less. So you'll leverage AI like you're talking about. You'll leverage AI to complete tasks for you, but you're still going to have to oversee it. Main problems that we have today is if you use something like ChatGPT or GitHub's Copilot and you ask it to go off and go and do something for you, it's going to provide you with exactly what you asked it to, whether it's right or wrong. So you've seen this with the likes of Terraform, we've seen it with Bicep, we see it with PowerShell automation. Its job is to provide you with a story. It's there to provide you with exactly what you asked, whether it's right or wrong, and that could be quite dangerous. If you are going to leverage AI within your organization, businesses need to be very careful about how they use it, who's using it, and with what oversight. Because if you were going to deploy a landing zone into Azure with all of your applications and you were going to do the whole thing using AI, there's a strong chance that you're going to have made a mistake somewhere. If you don't understand what it is that you're deploying, you could publicly expose internal data, you could increase cost, you could accidentally give the whole business access to all services. There is a whole plethora of things that you could very easily get wrong.
And you can maybe put guardrails in place to prevent things like that, but who's putting in those guardrails? You're not going to want to rely on AI to do that. The person is going to have to say, right, these are the boundaries and the parameters. So there's still an element of kind of human interaction and control there. It's a tool that, as you say, helps you to do things more efficiently and more quickly. That
question of, is it going to replace IT engineers? I think it's very clear that it's not going to replace IT engineers. It's just going to enable them to do more faster. Potentially better, but there's a caveat to that they could potentially get worse in some cases. I think as businesses lean on IT more, because every business in this day and age is a tech company. Maybe not the baker that is just down the road and is a small organization, but every business that is serving multiple customers at some point will start thinking about data and start thinking about tech. And where they leverage tech, they're going to win in business against their competitors. So if they've ended up with a really small team, they've not expanded that, and they've just thrown AI into the mix, there's a real danger. So I don't think IT engineers are going anywhere. I think they'll probably get more senior quicker, and their jobs will be to think about possible outcomes as opposed to just the low level creating users, managing virtual machines. It won't be that work anymore, and that work will just continue to increase. So I think the outlook's probably pretty good. Especially junior resources are going to get their hands on more difficult tasks far quicker and take away that lower level early days that people that go into IT encounter.
I think a lot of what just talked about there is sort of based on our current frame of reference of what AI is roughly capable of doing at the moment. If you were to kind of look forward, I don't know, 10, 15, 20 years into the future, the possibilities are potentially endless. Although that said, you know, I kind of think to myself sometimes, if you were to ask yourself 10 years ago what IT would be like in 10 years' time, you'd have probably be given a kind of more wild and far-flung answers to what we actually currently have now. So progress isn't always necessarily as exciting and as quick as we sometimes think it might be. That said, what's it going to look like in 10, 15, 20 years' time? What are your kind of radical ideas or concepts of what AI could be along that sort of time frame?
It's a good question. I'm a little bit more skeptical of the advancements that we'll make in tech. I think we've seen over the last 10, 15 years that actually tech doesn't move that quick. Yeah, we're in the cloud. Yeah, we're using PaaS services, but actually a lot of this technology has been available for a very long time. AI, the term AI, which is bandied around a lot, has actually, the solutions that really underpin it have been here for a very long time. This is just data intelligence. All that has happened is that the compute power that we've got available to us has increased. So as that continues to increase, yeah, we're going to see continuous improvement. So that might help us make decisions faster, might even help us do really, really innovative things like come up with new medicines and that kind of thing, which is brilliant. But do I think that it's going to radically change us in 10 years' time? Probably not. I think one of the big things that could change, to this point, it's all hypothetical, high cost, is quantum computing. So if we do get to a point where quantum computing becomes every day, then yeah, we're probably in the realms of increased productivity, increased efficiency, and then when that happens, we can start to learn things that are beyond human capabilities currently. I think it's highly unlikely that makes it to the mainstream within 10 years. I'd love to be proven wrong. I'd love us to get to a point where we discover the miracle cure for every disease in the world, but I'm very skeptical that's going to happen. Bill Gates has got a quote around, and the wording might be wrong, but we underestimate the progress that we'll make in 2 years, and we overestimate the progress that will be made in 10. I think it might actually be the other way around saying that. But as the technology that we have available to us improves, yeah, we're always going to get better. I think that 10 years from now, we'll be dealing with roughly what we're dealing with today, just more advanced versions of it. So business intelligence is going to be at the forefront of most organizations, probably within the next 5 years. It already is. But for what happens, we see technology come in, the large enterprise take hold of that technology first. It eventually filters down. And then by the time it gets to SME, the large enterprise are already on the next thing. We're already seeing that happen at the moment, and that'll continue to happen. So I reckon between 5 and 10 years from now, we'll still be in the same position. We'll probably still be leveraging public cloud. I don't see that going anywhere really. Some organizations might be starting to use their own private cloud, maybe a little bit more, but that'll probably just be out of cost. People trying to tighten their belts.
So no Skynet, no Terminators, not yet.
No, I don't think there's any danger of that quite yet. I think if someone can actually build a flying car first, then I'll start to believe that these things are going to happen. But until a certain someone gets their cars driving autonomously and flying around and everything, I think we're probably okay. You sound so professional.
I listen to a lot of Radio 4, fortunately.
Yeah.